Astrologers, we are performers, just as your psychoanalyst is a performer. Absolutely, no doubt about it. The profession is large enough to encompass different fields. There's the field of research, for example, and I'm not a good researcher. Then there's the field of analysis, and I believe I am a strong artist analyst. And then there's the field of therapy, and that comes with study, experience, age, time. You know, you can say a lot of wise things, but if your hair hasn't become silver, it doesn't have as much impact. I was saying much of what I do today when I was 35. But here I am 40 years later, and I'm taken a lot more seriously. So I'm an artist, analyst, and teacher of astrology. And what do I get out of that? We come close to managing a miracle wisely. Astrology has a touch of the miraculous about it. And when you have such an insightful tool, managing it wisely shows in your life, and when I see that I'm an agent to help that happen, I'm enriched. Yes, I help them change their own. But the short answer to that is emphatically yes. And if I didn't feel that, I would be skirting the responsibility of being effective. Well, when you have a gift like astrology, you've got to be able to have a purpose for it. And if you manage that purpose well, what more do you want? You fulfill yourself. Yeah, I think the Germans have a great word, a dramatic word for responsibility. It's Verantwortlichkeit, which really means to be answerable for. Now, if I know something, and it's crucial, and it is involved with my being, and I polish it, like astrology, I am answerable to it now. Is that clear? Verantwortlichkeit. And I feel, I'll put it in another way. Sometimes when I finish a phone consultation with somebody in Israel or South Africa or Japan or Thorndale, Pennsylvania, I don't ever see this person. They don't see me. They may have seen my photograph on books or something. Well, they just have no idea, but somebody referred me to them. And I hang up the phone. Immediately, there's a tension that is released. After a 45-minute, 50-minute consultation, your mind immediately is going to evaluate it. And I will say, wow, that was one hell of a thought that came in and helped. And then I think, where did it come from? It didn't come from page 97 in that 2,613th book. But those books prepared the way for my mind to come up with something like that. It's the same thing with any therapist or any psychiatrist or psychologist. The very good ones think. It approaches the majesty of silence. There's something so big within silence. We have to think to appreciate it. In music, a rest or a certain amount of time can be short or it can be long, where nothing is being heard suggests that a great deal is being played. A lot of people don't think. They don't build upon what they know. They don't feel that Verantwortlichkeit, that responsibility of creating more, which really ends up being less. It becomes simplicity. Now, the great adage you could play with is some great Chinese seer undoubtedly said, if you want to do this and that and this and that in your life, do it. There's an elegant simplicity that we avoid all too easily in our culture. It's run around and do it right with the rule books and all of this. There has to be something fundamental, direct, manageable, understandable, simple. That's the road I like to take. That's the road I like to help other people take. In a sense, I'm a salesperson. I'm selling truth. It's not an arrogant sense of truth. It's a reflective sense of truth. I feel that I'm a mirror, and I can say things with my strengths and my artistry that can be very, very helpful as a reflection to the person of where they are in life, how they got there, and where they're possibly going. It's a fantastic tool. It's the process of becoming revealed by the all-pervasive creative principle. I'm starting to sound like Zoltan Mason and Paul Tillich put together. I became aware of astrology in my after-college years, continuing my study of the human condition, potentials. What was the psychology before we had psychology? And the answer really comes down to an awareness of a position within the alchemical order, if you will. And astrology is always mentioned. And I did a great deal of reading and study. And one day I was watching television in New York City. I was taking voice lessons. I had found my alluring niche to be in singing. And I saw a very famous interviewer taking apart 3 or 4 astrologers, just ripping them apart. He's a very famous interviewer, no longer with us. And something came over me like a thunderbolt. And I called my wife in and I said, listen to that. It was David Susskind, if you ever heard of him. This Susskind is taking these people apart he's not giving them a chance, and they're not presenting it very well, but it's valid, and damn it, I'm going to learn to do it and make $1 million. Those are my exact words. Young man, intrepid 28-year-old. So the next day, my wife and I found our way to Mason's bookshop on Lexington Avenue, just above Bloomingdale's. We climbed up these rickety steps to this famous bookshop. And here I was, so big, and my wife was so gentle. And what's going to happen? That was in the air. We walked into this bookstore, and he saw me and thought, rich customer or something. I had a black cashmere overcoat on, and I was, starting to make it.
You had your spear.
Yeah. And he was a small little Hungarian. And we started talking. And I came on very arrogantly, as most people do when they don't know anything about astrology. They say, you mean to tell me that when a plane goes down and all 300 people on that plane have bad horoscopes? Something embarrassing like that. And he looked at me and he said, don't be afraid of what you don't know. Then he said, you must be a Capricorn. And I am. And I thought I was. And I looked at my wife and I said, she said, yes. I said, yes, I'm a Capricorn. How'd you know that? Every astrologer goes through the same type of confrontational breakdown of doubt. You have to break it down. And he said, looked at my wife and he said, and you, madam, you must be a Pisces. And she is. And my jaw was on the floor. I said, how did you know that? And he looked at me and almost scornfully, he said, Capricorns always victimize Pisces. Now this is the old school talking. Whoa, did he get my attention. It was a great moment. And then I bought a couple books. And I went home and I taught myself to put the horoscope together by hand. No computers at that day and age. And then I called him up and I said, Mr. Mason, I'd like to come in and have my horoscope analyzed. Okay. So I got the data, the normal. Went in to see him. And this was a very powerful moment. I was behaving badly again because, really, he can read me up and down the pike probably just as perception and experience. But is he really getting this from the horoscope? Stuff like that. Well, he was. And it was not a particularly riveting, interesting consultation. It wasn't. He said a few simplistic things, and he built them strongly into my life. And okay. But just as I was leaving, I said, well, thank you very much, Mr. Mason. He says, there's another thing, Noel. Got my attention. Another thing. He said, you can become a very, very fine, famous astrologer. You can be a great teacher in astrology. There was silence. I have this on tape. Every word I'm telling you is totally true. And I said, "Oh, Mr. Mason, you just want me to buy a lot of the books in your store." I was not a nice fellow. He said, "No, Noel, I don't see it in you. I see it in your horoscope." Isn't that great? That's great. And I subsequently bought hundreds of books from him, and he kept shipping them to me when I was living in Germany. Can I tell you a sequel onto that story? And I was launched. And then, of course, my first series of books, The Principles and Practice of Astrology, sold about 250,000 copies. And he was obviously selling them like hotcakes. And he knew who I was, my name. But I never went back to New York. I was in Germany, then I went to live in Minneapolis, and then traveling the world. And then I was on a book tour that was involving me with Barnes & Noble, and started out at their headquarters in Rockefeller Plaza and taking me across country. So I'm sitting in the hotel a few blocks from there, and I thought about Mr. Mason. I said, I should find out about him, because I really want to thank him. So I took the phone book out and I looked up Zoltan Mason. The bookstore was gone, but there was his name. And I recognized the address. It's a small little place probably in Greenwich Village. And he'd probably be 95 years old then, 94 years old, 94. So I dialed that number. It rang and rang and rang. And he answered in his distinctive voice, of course. He said, "Hello?" I said, "Mr. Mason, Zoltan Mason?" "Yes." "This is Noel Tyl." There was silence. "This is Noel Tyl." And I hear him say, "Oh my goodness." Brings tears to my eyes now. "Oh my goodness." Whew. I could barely collect myself. That was so poignant. I said, "I'd like to come down and see you. I want to thank you." "Oh my. Oh, okay. Oh my." He was obviously deeply impressed and touched. And I went to see him, dressed like the ambassador from Liechtenstein, and I walk into his little apartment. And there are books on his shelves, special ones, and there mine are. Isn't that lovely? And I said to him as I was leaving, and he was obviously a little bit disorganized in remembering one thought to the next. He would know something, and then it would come back later when he was talking about something else. And I said, "Mr. Mason, I want to make you a promise. I will help any student you refer to me, or any astrologer that you know who needs a break. You give them my name." I gave him my business card. and I will do everything I can to help them to pay you back. Oh my. Oh my. It was wonderful, just wonderful. And then about 2 years later, he died, a year later. My home office. Well, it's changed 3 times in the last 15 years. But what always goes with me is about 2,500 books. I am those books, and I will never part with them. And when I die, I don't know what's going to happen to them. My daughter doesn't want them, I don't think. There are 4 or 5, the old situation, if you were going on a desert island, you could take 4 books with you. Which 4 would you take? And astrologers had their favorites. I'm a big fan of a turn of the century, from around 1900 and 1910, astrologer named Alan Leo. Don't get me started, because this is quite a thinker. And if you are aware that he was in the Theosophy movement at that turn of that century, saying things that he did and showing how to use ideas that he had, it's remarkable. Later on, I think Dane Rudyard, who in 1930s brought Eastern ideas to Western usage. And he's hard to understand, but the practical appreciation of the spirit came out of his works. A very practical astrologer thereafter, around the end of the Second World War, was an ex-English teacher at Dartmouth named Grant Lewy, L-E-W-I. Grant Lewy was exquisitely practical. And any astrologer worth his salt needs to know Alan Leo, Dane Rudyard, and Grant Lewy. Notice I didn't include any of my books, my 35 books, in that list. But I think I would take Synthesis and Counseling in Astrology. That's 1,000 pages that I wrote, which is quite eclectic. And I refer to it often. I've worn out 2 editions. 2 volumes of it. I use books for stimulation, not to look things up in a codified way. I have a saying or a thought, giving so many seminars in 26 countries, people constantly asking technical questions. And my saying is, when you ask me a question, I can tell you the books you have not read. In other words, be well read. Know the field. It's essential. And when I get a letter that says, it's changed my life, my marriage has improved, I'm treating my children better, and I'm helping others to the best of my ability. And I tell them where I've learned, and I can't go beyond. It's very cute. And I go right back to them, and I say, we'll get you there to make you the best astrologer you can be. I'll tell you why. Yeah, I used coiling spaghetti measurements. There are some astrologers who don't feel that they have enough to say about life and the world, who hide behind coils of interlocked measurements, and it gets messy. I don't use one single word of jargon in my consultations, mainly because people won't know what you're saying. And I do have some other things I can say that are much more important than descriptive measurements. Spaghetti. I'll tell you the real reason within all of that. One of the students in my course, which I love so much, and my students keep me alive. They're just beautiful people. Answered the question on, I think that's lesson 4. List, please, the essentials of analysis that you've just learned in the first 3 lessons or 4 lessons. That's very important to see if they can recall them and list them and have them at the ready to use in the work that's now going on for 15 more lessons. And people usually come up with about 20 things and do it in a single column like this, and I can check it out. One person, and I can't remember who it was, wrote down absolutely everything I've ever said, it seemed. It just went on and on and on, and it was like 15 to 20 pages. She enjoyed the catharsis of coming up with indispensable keys to analysis, showing me and showing herself how much she retained and how she could now manage all of this. And the title she put on that section, that overdone section, was Noel Tyl's Spaghetti Sauce. And I thought it most appropriate. For me, it is a virtuoso performance to cook well. I like virtuoso things. As you know, I was an opera singer for 26 years. Specialist in Wagner. You can't get any more dramatically virtuosic than that. Oh, I did for years. And I had days. It was when I retired from it, knowing astrology was really beckoning me significantly and grandly. I couldn't turn on the radio without knowing who was singing. I mean, these were my colleagues, my friends. And I had to wean myself away from all of that. Yeah, I miss it. I have music on all the time. When I travel, I sometimes tune in my classical music station where I live in Arizona and have it on very quietly all night long. So that if I'm waking up in Oslo or Helsinki or Moscow, I hear that music and it grounds me. My favorite role, oh my, it would have to be Wotan in the Ring des Nibelungen. Wotan, king of the gods, big spear. I had a very large spear made for me that traveled with me when I went to different places, because it had to be in proportion to me. It was 10 feet 2 inches long. Als junge Liebe Lust mir verblich, verlangte nach Macht mein Mut. Von jäher Wünsche Wüten gejagt, gewann ich mir die Welt. That's beautiful poetry created by Wagner. And Wotan says that He was a young man and he wanted to take over the world. Gewann ich mir die Welt. I won for myself the world. Which introduces the whole metaphor of love and gold and power, and how that fractures the human condition. And even the gods feel it. I'd have to just stop right there. No, I will add also Scarpia and Tosca, Puccini's Tosca. To be a terribly evil person in that drama and make it attractive, because it's a seduction that Scarpia performs through his evil debauchery on Tosca. What I'm not showing off here, I'm saying to you that this is exciting, and I can't necessarily find a place in our American culture where there's such depth and saga awareness. Yes, of course I make noise. I don't know whether I sing. I sing in elevators. It's very interesting. The doors open in the middle of a phrase, and I stop, and the people have heard it, and they wonder, where'd that come from? But I know I can do astrology until I die. With singing opera, you have to realize that you can't stay in top physical condition all the time, and it becomes a very heavy strain. Constantly worried about your health and constantly worried about your sound, constantly under pressure in 7 languages. It's a very tough field. People think it's my funny Valentine with a microphone in your hand. No, there are no microphones, and my funny Valentine does not come from an opera. Yes, they really are. I studied theology at Harvard with Paul Tillich, one of my teachers. And Paul Tillich was a great Protestant theologian who wrote the very famous book, The Courage to Be, Mut zu sein, in German. And he had a twinkle in his eye at all times. And his thesis was to see God not as God, but as the all-pervasive creative principle. I can hear him saying it. The all-pervasive creative principle that flows through everything. Are we aware of that all-pervasive creative principle? How much of it is in our awareness? And this is where religion, which is really going back to tie things together with reason, that's what the word etymologically means, as you know. Religion and astrology get together, because astrology is a reflection of the all-pervasive creative principle. A very famous astrologer named Robert de Luce, this is a stage name, De Luce, about the stars, about the lights. Well, he said the planets are the windows through which we see God's purpose. A very interesting thought. And that was back in the 20s and 30s. I'll leave it at that. It doesn't take, no, I won't. I got to say one more thing. It will not take away from my appreciation of the all-pervasive creative principle to have had a career in astrology. because I often say to my students, we're in touch with a miracle. And implicit in that observation is manage with care. It's like the Hippocratic Oath. The first line is do no harm. Oh, the first word in my mind is posterity. Books are going out of fashion, unfortunately. And I wanted very much to put illuminated thoughts about astrology onto the medium of the near future. So that 120 years from now, as I'm talking about Alan Leo, somebody might be talking about me. When I've lectured in London, some years back especially, I knew there was a chance that somebody could be in the audience who actually had seen Alan Leo and heard him, heard his voice. And I kept looking for old geezers, in the audiences. And I would announce it. And one time in Manchester, man said, yes, I heard him. Yes, I was. Well, I was thrilled. I sat him down. I got him isolated. And then I realized he really didn't. I tested his questions, with questions. But that was close. Now, people are going to have enough DVDs of me that I can't go wrong. I hope not. I long ago put together some lectures about changing your horoscope. And of course, it's much simpler than it sounds. It sounds so dramatic. How can you possibly change your horoscope, maneuvering those planets into other positions? The answer is very, very practical, and that is you alter your behavior. And your behavioral modification is the secret to all good therapy. And when I want to therapeutically improve my regard in a situation of my life, I inspect my behavior and I change it. But I can't do that without knowing things, knowing dimensions. And that's what I provide to others about their situations. So we all end up getting wiser. And you've got to have a sense of humor about yourself as an astrologer. You really do. Because somebody's going to come up to you and say, you predicted such hard times for Obama last August, and even to the point that he was in physical danger. And it didn't happen. Well, do we know how many assassination attempts are fielded by the White House every month? Quite a few. But that's not what I'm talking about. I'm talking about the fact that the horoscope of our President of the United States has been under such siege of late that it's almost to erase him. The way the Egyptians did with Akhenaten. When he died, they erased his name from the temples. Obama, our esteemed president, has had a very tough time of almost being annihilated in this historical depression. That's what I meant. Now, finding the right words for other people is part of our art. We have to communicate well. So you have to handle stuff like that. It gets hard sometimes, really hard. I happen to have a gift of gab. I can talk well. I've had a keen enough education that I think that might end up to being something that people want to remember. It's like Larry King, other interviewers saying, if I could only have gotten the Pope to sit down with me, I would have been fulfilled in my career. Something like that. I don't think in those terms. You can't look at a horoscope and tell the difference between a prostitute and a pope. You just can't. Or a prostitute and a politician, which sometimes are interchangeable. But you can't. Hollywood thinks you can as an astrologer, but it's not so. The concept of level in society. Slick Willie Sutton, the very famous criminal, or John Dillinger, these names that buzz around in our history books about crime, these people were very creative people. So that's what you'll see. And how they used it is up to them. What do you do for a living, Mr. Dillinger? That's a fair question in the intimacy and privacy and confidentiality of a client-astrologer relationship. Well, I rob banks. Now you have established level. He is a convicted felon. What are you going to do? See my point? I would not handle the Pope any differently than I would a beautician in Erkrath, Germany, which is a very small hamlet. Okay. I've learned to say I didn't do as well there as I could have. But when that happens, you fall back on your laurels. Who predicted the fall of Russia exact to the week, 18 months before it happened? In print. In print. I got a call, one in particular I remember, from a very well-known astrologer saying, "Are you crazy?" And then, who predicted the land for peace resolution in the White House between Palestine, or whatever you want to call the PLO, and Israel? Exact to the week, using astrology. I can lecture on it, 2 years ahead of time, in print. I can go on and on like that. So you fall back on your laurels, but that can't blind you. You have to be circumspect and realize that weathermen make mistakes or oversights, and so does your doctor. And I'm not excusing the astrologer who gets out there and takes a chance. I'm saying we have to be circumspect to realize it is not infallible. I have finally been able to say to myself, your work might be suffering if you do so much. So be careful. Cut it back. But it's very hard to do. Very hard to do. If we finish this interview, you better tell me it was a good interview and that you're pleased, or I'll have a fit. No, but you hear what I'm saying. I'm being very human. This is the way it is. I'm answering your question. Don't change my answer.